He owned the city skyline, but he couldn't stand the sight of his own wife. Alistair Blackwood, a titan of industry, saw Eleanor as nothing more than a necessary but deeply embarrassing part of a business merger. He called her plain a ghost in his gilded mansion, a wallflower he actively hid from the public eye. But a ghost can still hear. And after one final crushing insult, Eleanor decided the wallflower was about to bloom. She embarked on a secret transformation, preparing for one single night, the Metropolis Charity Gala, to show her husband and the world exactly who they had underestimated. Alistair Blackwood didn't marry a woman. He'd acquired a final critical asset. Eleanor Vance was the biological key to the successful merger between Blackwood Industries and Vance Pharmaceuticals, a deal brokered by their fathers on a golf course years before either of them had a say in the matter. The agreement was ironclad. The union of their companies would be sealed by the union of their children. Alistair got controlling shares of a pharmaceutical empire, and Eleanor got the Blackwood name and a cage, albeit a gilded one. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum of Alistair's success. It was a cold expanse of marble, glass, and steel, with panoramic views of a city that worshipped him. And in this sprawling testament to his power, Eleanor was the ghost. She was quiet, unobtrusive, and in Alistair's cutting opinion, painfully plain. She had intelligent hazel eyes that saw everything, but she kept them downcast. Her mousy brown hair was often pulled back in a simple severe bun, and her wardrobe consisted of a rotation of beige-grey and navy cardigans and sensible skirts that seemed designed to make her fade into the expensive wallpaper. Alistair was a man carved from ambition and arrogance, with sharp, dark features, a physique honed by personal trainers, and a collection of Savile Row suits. He commanded attention wherever he went. He thrived in the spotlight, his name a constant presence in the pages of Forbes and Vogue. His wife, however, was his secret shame. In the 3 years of their marriage, he had never willingly taken her to a major public event. On the rare occasions her presence was unavoidable, he would introduce her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is Eleanor," before immediately turning his attention to someone more important, more beautiful, more interesting. The mockery wasn't always so public. More often, it was a daily series of small, sharp cuts. "For God's sake, Eleanor, are you wearing that again?" He'd sneer as she came down for breakfast, her simple grey dress a stark contrast to his immaculate Tom Ford suit. "You have a black card with no limit. Try to look like you're married to me, not my bookkeeper." She would just murmur a quiet, "I'm comfortable, Alistair," which only seemed to infuriate him further. "Comfort is the luxury of people who don't have to be looked at," he'd retort, not even glancing up from his tablet. His cruelty was casual, a thoughtless byproduct of his immense ego. He never considered her feelings, because to him, she was not a complete person. She was a contractual obligation, a piece of living furniture. He had no idea that she had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, with a degree in finance, that she could speak 3 languages fluently, or that she found solace in reading Russian literature in its original text late at night when the cavernous penthouse was silent. He never asked. The upcoming Metropolis Charity Gala was the apex of New York's social calendar, an event Alistair considered his personal stage. This year, the Blackwood Industries name was the lead sponsor. His attendance was non-negotiable, and to his profound irritation, so was his wife's. Board members, particularly the older, more traditional ones from the Vance side, had been making comments about her absence at previous functions. It looked bad. It looked to be specific, like there was trouble in the perfect billionaire's marriage. He brought it up one evening, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. "The gala is on the 1st of next month. You'll be coming with me." Eleanor looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. "Oh, I wasn't aware." "Well, you are now," he said sharply. "My PR team thinks it's imperative we present a united front." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I've had my assistant contact a stylist. Her name is Celine. She'll be here tomorrow at 10. For the love of God, listen to her. Don't argue. Just let her turn you into something presentable." He didn't see the flicker of pain in her hazel eyes. Or perhaps he did, and simply didn't care. To him, this was a problem to be managed. His plain wife needed to be polished up like a dull piece of silver before she could be put on display. "Of course, Alistair," she said, her voice a soft whisper that was easily swallowed by the vastness of the room. He gave a curt nod, satisfied. He drained his scotch and walked out of the room without another word, leaving her alone with the city lights and the weight of his casual disdain. Eleanor closed her book, the words on the page blurring. She walked to the window, looking down at the endless stream of bright, bustling lights. Everyone down there was living a life full of choices and feelings and heartbreaks and joys. She was up here higher than all of them, in a silent, sterile palace, more isolated than any of them could ever imagine. For 3 years, she had endured. For 3 years, she had made herself small and invisible, hoping that if she didn't draw attention, she could at least find peace. But his demand that she be made presentable was not just an insult. It was a command to be a dollar prop on his arm for one night. He didn't want her. He wanted a sanitized, approved version of her. And as she stared at her faint reflection in the glass, a quiet, cold resolve began to form in the depths of her heart. He wanted something presentable. Fine, he would get it. But it wouldn't be on his terms. It would be on hers. The stylist Celine arrived precisely at 10 the next morning. She was a chic, bird-like woman, with a severe black bob and an air of professional impatience. She assessed Eleanor with a critical eye, walking a slow circle around her, as if inspecting a piece of unremarkable livestock. "Well," Celine began, her French accent sharp, "we have a canvas, a very blank canvas." She gestured for her assistants to bring in racks of glittering gowns in jewel tones, fabrics that shimmered and flowed like liquid metal. For hours, Eleanor was poked, prodded, and pushed into dresses that felt like costumes. Each one was a testament to Alistair's taste, loud, expensive, and designed to scream trophy. There was a crimson dress with a plunging neckline, a gold sequined number that was blindingly bright, and a sapphire blue gown that felt heavy and suffocating. "Mr. Blackwood specified he wants something that makes a statement," Celine said, yanking a zipper. "He wants you to look vibrant." Eleanor knew what he meant. He wanted her to look like the women he was usually seen with, models and actresses who were as dazzling and disposable as champagne flutes. She felt like an imposter in her own skin, the beautiful clothes only serving to highlight how much she wasn't the woman who was supposed to wear them. Later that week, the final straw landed. It wasn't a direct blow, but a glancing one, overheard, and all the more painful for it. Alistair was hosting an informal business dinner in their private dining room. Eleanor, as usual, had made herself scarce, retreating to the library that adjoined the space. The heavy oak doors were nearly closed, but a small gap remained, and the voices lubricated by expensive wine carried. She heard the booming laugh of Julian Croft, Alistair's primary business rival. Croft was everything Alistair was, but with a veneer of old money charm that Alistair's new money aggression could never replicate. Their rivalry was legendary in New York's financial circles. "I have to say, Alistair," Croft's smooth voice drifted through the door, "you've played the long game brilliantly. Locking down Vance Farmer was a masterstroke. Pity about the attachments." Alistair's friends chuckled. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She knew they were talking about her. "She's a means to an end, Julian. Nothing more." Alistair's voice was slick with condescension. He was performing for his audience. "The agreement stands. The woman is useful for maintaining the family connection with the board. But let's be honest, she's an eyesore. An absolute zero in the charisma department. Keeping her out of the spotlight is a full-time job." Someone else chimed in. "Come on, Alistair. You could have at least married one with a bit of spark." "The packaging was irrelevant," Alistair shot back, and the finality in his tone was like a slap. "I bought the company, not the wrapping paper. As long as she stays quiet and doesn't embarrass me, she's fulfilling her side of the bargain." The laughter that followed was a physical blow. Eleanor shrank back from the door, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle a gasp. An eyesore. The wrapping paper. He hadn't just said it to her in a moment of anger. He had said it to his rival, to his friends, as a point of pride. He was boasting about how little she meant to him. In that moment, something inside her didn't just break. It shattered, and the pieces began to reassemble themselves into something new, something hard and sharp. The quiet acceptance she had cultivated for 3 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear fury. She had been a ghost in his house, a footnote in his life, a contractual obligation he barely tolerated. No more. She backed away from the door silently, her movements graceful and sure. She went to her bedroom, the one at the opposite end of the penthouse from Alistair's, and sat at her antique writing desk. She unlocked a small hidden drawer and pulled out a worn leather-bound address book. It had belonged to her mother, a woman who before her illness had been a force of nature, brilliant, stylish, and unapologetically herself. Eleanor flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the elegant, faded script, until she found the name she was looking for. Isabella Rossi, Rome. Isabella had been her mother's closest confidant, a legendary figure whispered about in the highest echelons of European society. She wasn't just a stylist. She was a sculptor of personas, an artist who worked not in clay or stone, but in confidence, posture, and presence. She had retired years ago, disappearing from the public eye to live a secluded life in Italy, refusing all clients. Eleanor picked up her phone. She didn't hesitate. She knew it was a long shot, but the fire Alistair had just ignited in her gut was burning too brightly to be ignored. She would not be presentable. She would not be a doll dressed by his stylist. She would be a masterpiece of her own making. The phone rang for a long time before a husky, accented voice answered. Pronto. Eleanor took a deep breath, the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Isabella, she said, her voice steady and clear, devoid of its usual whisper. This is Eleanor Vance. I'm Catherine Vance's daughter. I need your help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor could hear the faint sound of cicadas, a world away from the sterile quiet of her penthouse. Catherine's girl. Isabella Rossi's voice was a low, smoky rasp, like aged whiskey. I haven't heard that name in years. I am retired, Cara. I know, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. I wouldn't call if it weren't important. It's not about a dress. It's about... and resurrection. Another pause. Isabella was intrigued. Resurrection. That is a very big word. He called me wrapping paper. Eleanor said the words tasting like ash. He said I was an eyesore he had to hide. He's going to parade me out at the Metropolis Gala, and he expects me to be his quiet, plain little accessory. I refuse. The cicadas buzzed. Then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. Ah, a man. It is always a man. Your mother, she would have burned his entire world to the ground for saying such a thing. You have her fire in you, I think. It is just sleeping. Very well, little bird. Let's see if we can teach you how to roar. I will be in New York in 2 days. Cancel this, Celine. We have work to do. The line went dead. Eleanor felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. The game had just changed. The next day she dismissed a bewildered Celine, telling her simply that her services were no longer required. She then informed Alistair that she would be handling her own arrangements for the gala. He barely looked up from his desk. Fine, just don't show up in one of your grey cardigans. I'll be mortified enough as it is. He was so secure in his perception of her that he couldn't fathom her doing anything of consequence. His dismissal was the perfect cover. Isabella Rossi was not what Eleanor expected. She wasn't a whirlwind of air kisses and fashion jargon. She was a woman in her late 60s with piercing dark eyes, a mane of silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, and an aura of absolute authority. She arrived at the service entrance with a single suitcase and surveyed the penthouse with a look of profound disdain. "This place has no soul," she declared. "It is a bank vault with a view. No wonder you are hiding." Their work began not in a closet, but in Eleanor's mind. For the first few days, they didn't look at a single item of clothing. They talked. Isabella had Eleanor tell her everything about her childhood, her love for numbers and literature, her forgotten ambitions, the slow, crushing weight of her marriage. Isabella listened, her gaze never wavering, dissecting every word, every hesitation. "You have made yourself invisible as a shield," Isabella concluded one afternoon as they sat in the rarely used sunroom. "You think if they cannot see you, they cannot hurt you. But a shield can also be a cage, Eleanor. You have locked yourself inside." The training was rigorous and holistic. Isabella was a drill sergeant in Dior. They started with posture. Shoulders back. Your ancestors were not invertebrates tall. Walk as if you own the ground beneath you, not as if you are apologizing for taking up space. Eleanor spent hours walking back and forth in the long hallway, a stack of books on her head, until her tentative shuffle transformed into a graceful, confident stride. Next came her voice. Isabella made her read poetry aloud, projecting from her diaphragm. "Your voice is a whisper. A whisper is for secrets and prayers, not for the boardroom or the ballroom. Speak as if you expect to be heard." Her soft murmurs slowly gained timbre and strength, becoming measured and clear. Isabella also scrutinized her habits. "Stop hiding behind your hair. Stop looking at the floor. Eye contact is not a challenge. It is a conversation. Let them see the intelligence in your eyes. It will frighten the weak and impress the strong." While Isabella was remodeling her presence, Eleanor was secretly rebuilding her independence. Years ago, she had inherited a modest but respectable stock portfolio from her grandmother. Alistair, after a cursory glance, had dismissed it as pocket money and forgotten all about it. But Eleanor, with her Wharton education and an untapped, brilliant financial mind, had been managing it meticulously. In the privacy of her study late at night, she wasn't just reading Tolstoy. She was analyzing market trends, making daring, calculated investments in tech startups and emerging biotech firms. Her pocket money had quietly grown into a substantial fortune, a secret nest egg that gave her a burgeoning sense of power. It was her escape plan long before she knew she was planning an escape. Finally, a week before the gala, Isabella addressed the wrapping paper. She didn't bring in racks of dresses. Instead, she and Eleanor collaborated. They didn't look at trends, they looked for a statement. "This is not about being beautiful," Isabella explained, sketching designs in a notebook. "Alistair is surrounded by beauty. It is common. It is cheap. This is about being unforgettable. We will create an enigma. When you walk into that room, they should not say, 'She is beautiful.' They should say, 'Who is that?'" They commissioned a gown from a reclusive avant-garde designer in Antwerp, whose work was closer to art than fashion. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light, structured with architectural precision, but flowing with an ethereal grace. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly unique. It was a dress that did not wear the woman. The woman had to inhabit it. The physical transformation was the final piece. A top hairstylist sworn to secrecy was flown in from Paris. He cut her mousy brown hair, layered it to frame her face, and dyed it a rich, warm chestnut with subtle glints of auburn. A makeup artist, a legend in the editorial world, showed her how to accentuate her high cheekbones and define her large, intelligent hazel eyes, making them the arresting focal point of her face. On the afternoon of the gala, Eleanor looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger, but also, paradoxically, the most honest version of herself she had ever seen. The plainness was gone, stripped away to reveal the strength that had been there all along. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, cool determination. Isabella stood behind her, a rare, proud smile on her face. "There you are, Cara," she said softly. "I was wondering when you would show up." Eleanor smiled back, a true, confident smile that reached her eyes. "Alistair is expecting a wallflower," she said, her voice low and resonant. "He's about to get a forest fire." The Metropolis Charity Gala was an exercise in ostentatious grandeur. The entrance to the Museum of Modern Art was a river of flashing camera bulbs and velvet ropes. Luxury cars pulled up one after another, depositing the city's elite onto a red carpet that snaked past a throng of reporters and onlookers. Alistair Blackwood arrived early and alone. He thrived in this environment, moving through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark. He wore a custom Brioni tuxedo, the dark fabric a perfect foil for his ruthless ambition. He glad-handed politicians, exchanged barbed pleasantries with business rivals, and posed for the cameras with an easy, practiced smile. He was in his element. Several people asked about his wife. "Where's Eleanor tonight, Alistair?" asked a portly banking CEO. Alistair gave a theatrical, dismissive sigh. "Oh, you know Eleanor. She's probably still deciding which shade of beige to wear. She'll be along. Don't worry, I've had her thoroughly. Styled. She might even be recognizable tonight." He winked, and the men around him shared a knowing chuckle. He felt a familiar pang of irritation. He just hoped she wouldn't do anything to actively embarrass him. He secured a glass of champagne and positioned himself near the grand staircase, the main entry point to the ballroom where he could hold court. He was deep in a conversation with Julian Croft. Their talk, a polite dance of veiled insults and power plays, when a sudden hush fell over the usually clamorous foyer. It wasn't an abrupt silence, but a spreading wave of quiet, as conversations faltered and heads began to turn one by one toward the entrance. A ripple of whispers followed. Alistair, annoyed by the interruption, glanced impatiently toward the staircase. And then he saw her. For a moment his brain simply refused to process the image. He saw a woman descending the grand marble staircase, and his first thought was that she must be a movie star, or perhaps European royalty he hadn't been briefed on. She moved with a liquid grace, her hand gliding lightly over the balustrade. The gown, a breathtaking creation of midnight blue silk, seemed to absorb the light around her, creating an aura of mystery and power. It wasn't revealing yet. It clung to a figure that was surprisingly slender and strong. Her rich chestnut hair caught the light, framing a face with sculpted cheekbones and a determined yet serene expression. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were large, intelligent, and scanning the crowd with an unhurried, confident gaze. There was no timidity, no apology in them. They held a silent, formidable power. Alistair felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He squinted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. There was something about the line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. Julian Croft, standing beside him, let out a low whistle. "My God," he murmured, his usual cynical mask falling away for a second. "Now that is a woman. Who is she?" The woman reached the bottom of the staircase. The cameras, which had been focused on a famous actress, swung toward her in a frantic, unified motion, the sound of shutters clicking like a hailstorm. She didn't flinch. She didn't pose. She simply paused, her eyes continuing their calm survey of the room. And then her gaze landed on Alistair. She held his eyes for a single, charged second. A ghost of a smile, enigmatic and cool, touched her lips. It was in that smile that Alistair's world tilted on its axis. The recognition crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. The air left his lungs. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly heavy, alien. It was Eleanor. It was his wife. His plain, invisible, beige wife. But it couldn't be. The woman standing before him was a goddess, a queen. She carried herself with an authority he had never seen. The mousy hair was gone, the dowdy clothes were gone, the downcast eyes and the apologetic posture were gone. Every trace of the woman he had so casually mocked and dismissed had been annihilated. In her place stood this breathtaking stranger who wore his wife's face. "Alistair, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Julian Croft said, a note of amusement in his voice. He followed Alistair's stunned gaze, and his eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Wait a minute, is that Eleanor?" Alistair couldn't answer. He was completely, utterly speechless. His mouth was dry, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a strange, terrifying new emotion, awe. He watched frozen as several of the city's most powerful men he had been trying to impress all night, began to move toward her. Their expressions a mixture of admiration and intense curiosity. She greeted them with a quiet nod and a warm yet reserved smile. Her voice when she spoke was not the whisper he was used to, but a low, melodious tone that carried easily. He had wanted her to be presentable. He had wanted her to be an accessory. But this was not an accessory. This was a supernova. And she hadn't just entered the room. She had taken it. The rest of the evening unfolded like a fever dream for Alistair. He felt as though he had been relegated to the role of a spectator at his own event, watching a drama he didn't understand, starring a woman he thought he knew. He saw his wife, this new, unbelievable Eleanor, move through the gala's glittering crowd, not with the timid uncertainty he expected, but with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. Before he could recover from his initial shock and cross the floor to her. She was intercepted by Julian Croft. Alistair watched his jaw tight as his chief rival took Eleanor's hand, bowing slightly to kiss her knuckles in a gesture of old-world gallantry. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "I must confess I almost didn't recognize you. You are absolutely magnificent." Alistair expected Eleanor to blush, to stammer, to shrink under the attention. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully. "Thank you, Julian. It's amazing what a change in perspective can do." Her reply was smooth, witty, and held a subtle double meaning that was clearly not lost on Croft, who laughed in appreciation. Alistair started towards them, a possessive, primal instinct kicking in. This was his wife. What was Croft doing? But as he approached, Eleanor turned to greet Marcus Thorne, the notoriously reclusive tech billionaire. Alistair had been trying to get a meeting with Thorne for months. Now here was his wife talking to him as if they were old friends. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I was fascinated by your company's recent acquisition of the AI logistics firm Omnicorp. Their predictive modeling is revolutionary, but I imagine the real challenge will be integrating their volatile code base with your existing infrastructure." Thorne, a man who famously despised small talk, looked at her with genuine surprise and interest. "You follow AI logistics. I follow smart investments," Eleanor replied smoothly. "And that was one of the smartest I've seen all year." Alistair stopped dead in his tracks. He had no idea she even knew what AI logistics were. He watched dumbfounded as she and Thorne engaged in an animated technical conversation, Thorne nodding enthusiastically. The power brokers and socialites around them were drawn into her orbit, not just by her stunning appearance, but by the palpable intelligence and confidence she radiated. He felt a hot surge of something ugly and unfamiliar jealousy. It was quickly followed by an even more unsettling feeling he was irrelevant to her. She wasn't looking for him, didn't seem to need his validation or his presence. She was building her own connections, commanding her own spotlight. Finally, he managed to corner her near the terrace. "Eleanor," he said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "What is all this? What did you do to yourself?" She turned to face him, her hazel eyes cool and direct. The look in them was not of a wife greeting her husband, but of a stranger assessing an obstacle. "I decided to wear something other than beige, Alistair. I thought you'd be pleased." "Pleased? This is a costume. A ridiculous stunt," he hissed, trying to regain control. He reached for her arm, his old habit of physically directing her kicking in. She moved back half a step, just enough to make his hand fall into empty space. The rejection was subtle, but absolute. "Is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or is it possible that the woman you've been living with for 3 years was the costume, and this is the first time you're seeing the real me?" He was floored. He had no response. He was used to her complaints, her silence. This cool, articulate defiance was completely disarming. "People are staring," he grumbled, trying a different tactic. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" She glanced around the ballroom. "The only person I see making a scene, Alistair, is you. Everyone else seems to be having a lovely time." She gave him another one of those small, enigmatic smiles. "Now, if you'll excuse me, the curator of the Guggenheim wants to discuss a potential endowment. I believe he's a friend of my father's." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone and exposed. The Emperor had no clothes, and for the first time in his life, Alistair Blackwood felt foolish. He had spent years mocking the quiet woman by his side, all while a queen lay dormant. Tonight she had awakened, and in doing so, she had completely rewritten the rules of their world. He was no longer the sun around which she orbited. He was just another planet, suddenly knocked off his axis, watching her blaze her own path across the sky. The fear that had been a spark was now a raging fire. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had lost something he never even knew he had. The gala was a public execution of Alistair's ego. The following days were the slow, agonizing post-mortem. The city was buzzing, but not about him or his company's sponsorship. They were buzzing about Eleanor Blackwood. The society pages, which had never once featured her, were now filled with breathless descriptions of the mystery woman who had captivated the Metropolis Gala. Photos of her were everywhere, cool, poised, and devastatingly elegant. They called her transformation miraculous, stunning, the debut of the decade. For Alistair, each headline was another twist of the knife. He returned to the penthouse after the gala expecting. He didn't know what. A confrontation. An explanation. Instead, he found nothing. Eleanor's room was quiet. The door closed. The next morning, she was gone before he woke. A brief, formal note was left on the kitchen's marble island. "I will be staying at my mother's old city apartment for a while. My assistant will coordinate with yours if anything is required." The cold fury that rose in him was a defense mechanism against the deeper, more terrifying feeling of utter confusion. This was not the woman he married. This was not the deal he'd made. He had to understand. He treated the problem like any business threat. He launched an investigation. His first call was to David Chen, his discreet and ruthlessly efficient head of security. "I want to know everything Eleanor has been doing for the past 6 months, Alistair ordered, pacing his office high above the city. "Every meeting, every phone call, every credit card transaction. I want to know who was behind this circus." David, a man accustomed to digging up corporate espionage secrets and vetting billion-dollar deals, was momentarily taken aback. "Sir, on Mrs. Blackwood. You heard me, David. Everything. And I want the name of the stylist who created that dress." The first report landed on his desk within 48 hours, and it only deepened the mystery. There was no stylist on record. The gown had been commissioned directly from a designer in Antwerp, paid for from a private bank account Alistair didn't recognize. The hair and makeup artists were freelancers who had signed ironclad NDAs, but one name appeared with intriguing frequency: Isabella Rossi, the legendary image consultant who had vanished from public life a decade ago. Phone records showed multiple calls between Eleanor and a private number in Rome, followed by flight records showing Isabella arriving in New York 3 weeks before the gala. Alistair stared at the name. Isabella Rossi wasn't a stylist you hired. She was a kingmaker, a woman who only worked with world leaders and cultural icons. How in God's name did Eleanor even get a meeting with her? The financial report was even more shocking. David had managed to trace the bank account the gown was paid from. It was part of a private brokerage account under Eleanor's maiden name, Vance, an account Alistair had dismissed years ago. He pulled up the portfolio, his access as her husband, giving him the authority he needed, and his breath hitched. It wasn't pocket money. It was a fortune. The initial inheritance of a few million had been cultivated with breathtaking skill. She had invested early in obscure tech firms that had since exploded. She had shorted a failing retail giant months before its public collapse. She had diversified into green energy and pharmaceuticals with the foresight of a seasoned Wall Street predator. Her portfolio had grown exponentially now, rivaling the net worth of some of the men he considered his peers. She was in her own right independently and staggerably wealthy. He felt a wave of vertigo. He had been calling her a bookkeeper while she was quietly playing the market like a virtuoso. He had lectured her about his unlimited black card while she was amassing a fortune he hadn't even known existed. The power dynamic he had taken for granted was a complete fiction. She didn't need him. She hadn't needed him for a very long time. Driven by a new, desperate need for answers, Alistair did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He investigated her past. He called a contact. He had an old-school private investigator named Finn, and asked him to dig into the Vance family, specifically into Eleanor's life before their marriage. The story Finn pieced together was a quiet tragedy. The Vances had once been more than just wealthy. They were socially prominent. But when Eleanor was in her late teens, her father had been embroiled in a nasty, high-profile insider trading scandal. Though he was eventually exonerated, the media frenzy was merciless. They hounded the family with paparazzi camping outside their estate. A particularly aggressive photographer had caused a car accident that badly injured her mother, Catherine, an injury from which she never fully recovered, leading to a reliance on the painkillers that would eventually contribute to her early death. The trauma had changed Eleanor profoundly. She had been bright, vibrant, and on the cusp of a brilliant career. But the predatory nature of the public eye, the way their family was torn apart for sport, had driven her into hiding. Her plainness, her quietness, her invisibility. It wasn't her nature. It was a fortress. She had deliberately built a shell around herself, a defense mechanism to ensure no one would ever look at her, judge her, or hurt her again. Alistair put the phone down, the investigator's words echoing in the silent office. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He hadn't just mocked her for being plain. He had mocked her for her armor. He had belittled the very walls she had built to protect herself from the kind of brutal public world he reveled in. He had been the monster she was hiding from, and he had been living in her house. His phone buzzed. It was an alert from his legal department. Julian Croft's company, Croft Consolidated, had just submitted a formal proposal for a joint venture. It wasn't addressed to Blackwood Industries. It was a multi-billion-dollar green energy initiative, and the proposal was addressed directly to Ms. Eleanor Vance, CEO of EV Capital, the official name of her private investment firm. Croft hadn't just admired her at the gala. He had recognized her power, and now he was treating her as an equal, a formidable player in a game Alistair thought he owned. The last piece of his superiority crumbled into dust. Armed with the devastating truth of his own ignorance, Alistair knew he couldn't let this play out through assistants and lawyers. He drove himself to the address on Eleanor's note, a classic, elegant brownstone in the West Village that felt a world away from the cold modernity of their penthouse. It felt like her understated solid and possessing a quiet, hidden strength. She opened the door herself. She was not wearing a gown or expertly applied makeup. She was in simple black trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. Yet the timid woman was gone forever. The confidence she had worn at the gala was still there now, a quiet, unshakable core of her being. She looked at him not with anger, but with a calm, appraising distance. "Alistair," she said, her voice even. "I wasn't expecting you." "Can I come in?" he asked. The words felt foreign, humble. He had never asked for permission to enter a room in his own home. She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. The apartment was filled with books, warm wood, and comfortable furniture. It was a home, not a showroom. It was her. He didn't know where to start. The arrogance that had been his default setting for his entire life had deserted him. "The gala," he began, his voice hoarse. "Eleanor, You were speechless," she finished for him, a wry, sad smile on her lips. "That was the point. For one night, I wanted you to see me. To really see me." "I was a fool," he said, the admission costing him more than any failed business deal ever had. "A cruel, blind fool. I read the reports, Eleanor, about your finances, about your family, about what happened to your mother." Her calm expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of old pain in her eyes. "You had me investigated." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I had to understand," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I had to know who the woman I married really was. The things I said to you, the way I treated you. I called your shield a weakness because I was too arrogant to see it for what it was. I'm so sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. It was genuine, wrenched from a place of profound shame. Eleanor listened, her gaze steady. She walked over to a small mahogany desk and picked up a thick manila envelope. She held it out to him. "I'm sorry too, Alistair," she said softly. "I'm sorry I allowed myself to be invisible for so long. I'm sorry I let my fear dictate my life. I'm sorry that our marriage was nothing more than a cage for both of us." He took the envelope. His fingers felt numb as he opened the flap and saw the legal letterhead. Divorce papers. His heart plummeted. "No," he whispered. "Eleanor, don't. I see you now. I swear to God I see you. Let's start over. Let me get to know the real you. The woman who can captivate a ballroom and outsmart Wall Street. Let me earn a place in your life." She shook her head, not with malice, but with a gentle finality. "This isn't a punishment, Alistair, and it's not a negotiating tactic. It's a statement. I am no longer the woman who signed that marriage contract. That Eleanor Vance is gone. I spent 3 years in your shadow, and I'm finally ready to stand in my own sun." He looked at the papers, then back at her face, truly seeing the intelligence, strength, and resilience etched there. He had possessed a diamond and had treated it like a common stone, only realizing its value when it was no longer his. The irony was crushing. The master of acquisitions had failed the most important merger of his life. "Is there no chance?" he asked, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that shocked them both. "The old me would have been afraid to leave," she said, her voice filled with a newfound peace. "The new me is afraid not to. I have a business to run. Julian Croft just proposed a very interesting joint venture." She allowed a small, confident smile. "I have a life to build. My own life." She didn't ask him to leave, but he knew it was time to go. He stood there for a moment longer, the divorce papers a dead weight in his hand, memorizing the face of the incredible woman he had so carelessly thrown away. He had wanted to leave her speechless, but in the end, she had been the one to silence him, not with address, but with her quiet, unassailable strength. He walked out of her home and back into the city, a city that suddenly felt like it belonged more to her than to him. The story wasn't over. He knew that. But for the first time, he was not the one writing it. Eleanor Vance Blackwood. No. Eleanor Vance was holding the pen, and her first chapter was just beginning. 6 months passed. The seasons in New York turned, but the shift in the city's power structure was more dramatic than the changing leaves in Central Park. The name Blackwood still commanded respect in boardrooms, but the name Vance now elicited something more potent intrigue. Eleanor did not move back into the gilded cage on Park Avenue. The divorce was finalized with a quiet efficiency that was characteristic of her new life. There were no messy tabloid battles or public recriminations. Eleanor's terms were simple. She wanted nothing from Alistair's fortune. She wanted only a clean separation, leaving her free to continue building her own. This act, more than anything else, cemented her status as a figure of immense and independent strength in the eyes of the public and the financial world. Her firm EV Capital moved into a sleek office in the newly developed Hudson Yards, a space of light glass and forward-thinking design. It was the architectural opposite of Alistair's opulent, heavy penthouse. Here, she thrived. The green energy venture with Julian Croft, dubbed Helios, was a resounding success. They were acquiring land-breaking ground and attracting investors who were drawn not only to the project's profitability, but to Eleanor's formidable reputation for meticulous research and ethical investing. Her partnership with Julian was one of deep intellectual respect. He was a shrewd businessman, but he found himself consistently impressed by her ability to see angles he had missed, to calculate risks with a calm precision that bordered on prophetic. Their meetings were a rapid-fire exchange of ideas, data, and strategy. Helios is stable, but we need to diversify our Q4 acquisitions, Eleanor stated one afternoon, standing before a digital chart in the conference room. The geopolitical climate is too unstable to rely solely on solar. I'm looking at a company in Finland, specializing in geothermal capture. Their tech is 10 years ahead of the curve. Julian leaned back in his chair, a genuinely impressed smile on his face. Finland. Of course. While everyone else is looking at the desert, you're looking under the ice. You never cease to amaze me, Eleanor. It's just about seeing the whole board, Julian, she replied, her confidence natural and unassuming. There was no flirtation between them, no hint of the romance the gossip columnists desperately wanted to invent. Theirs was a connection forged in the crucible of ambition and mutual brilliance. It was, in its own way, more intimate and far more powerful than a simple romance. Meanwhile, Alistair Blackwood was living in the echo of his former life. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like a mausoleum. The silence was immense. He had tried to fill it at first, hosting parties and bringing home the kind of beautiful, vapid women he had once preferred. But he found their conversation empty, their laughter grating. They were not her. They lacked the depth, the hidden fire, the quiet intelligence he had been blind to for so long and now craved with a desperate ache. He saw her, of course. It was impossible not to. He saw her on the cover of Forbes, profiled as the quiet titan of Wall Street. He saw paparazzi photos of her leaving a conference in Geneva, looking effortlessly chic in a tailored pantsuit. Her expression focused and serene. He saw her being interviewed on financial news networks, speaking with an eloquence and authority that made his heart clench with a mixture of pride and profound loss. One evening he was watching from his car stuck in traffic on Fifth Avenue. A digital billboard above him lit up. It was an ad for the Helios Initiative. It showed a pristine image of a wind farm at sunrise, and across the bottom, the corporate logos Croft Consolidated and EV Capital. Her name illuminated 20 feet high. His rival and his ex-wife building the future together. He finally understood. He had spent his life acquiring things, companies, buildings, assets. He had treated Eleanor like his ultimate acquisition, and in his arrogance, he had never bothered to look inside the wrapping paper. He had owned a treasure and let it slip through his fingers because he was too foolish to recognize its worth. His phone buzzed. It was his father. "Alistair," the old man's gruff voice said, "I see your ex-wife is making waves. Perhaps you should have paid more attention to what you had." The line went dead. The criticism from the one man whose approval he'd always sought was the final crushing blow. Alistair looked from the billboard, from her name in lights, to his own reflection in the polished window of his limousine. He saw a man who had everything and nothing. He had the money, the power, the skyline. But he was utterly, completely alone. Miles away in her own office, Eleanor stood by the window looking out at the same city. She didn't see a collection of buildings he owned. She saw a network of opportunities, a future she was building on her own terms. The past 3 years had been a quiet, painful winter. But now it was spring, and everything was beginning to grow. She took a sip of her tea, a small, genuine smile on her face, and turned back to her work. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. But in her world, it felt like the dawn. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say, and that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the changes you inspire. She transformed not just her appearance, but her destiny, proving that self-worth is the most breathtaking accessory of all. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember that she was always a queen. If her journey from being a ghost in a gilded cage to the master of her own empire moved you, please let us know by hitting that like button. What part of her transformation did you find most powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more unforgettable stories of resilience and redemption, don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for listening.